Day 2 of Rosh Hashanah, our tradition has become a conversation between Rabbi Feinstein and me. And so the topic for this morning that we chose was the Haftorah that Gary chanted just about 4.5 hours ago on the Shema. Jeremiah 31 is the Haftorah. And the question is, why do we read Jeremiah 31 for our Haftorah? And what does Jeremiah have to teach us in this moment? So let's take a step back for just a minute before we dive into Jeremiah 31. The Jewish Encyclopedia entry on Jeremiah begins like this. For those of us who are not as familiar with Jeremiah, in the case of no other Israelite prophet, is information so full as in that of Jeremiah. The historical portions of the book of Jeremiah give detailed accounts of his external life, evidently derived from eyewitnesses, probably his pupil Baruch. Jeremiah's prophecies give an insight into his inner life, and by reason of their subjective quality explain his character and his inward struggles. Of a gentle nature, he longed for the peace and happiness of his people, instead of which he was obliged to proclaim its destruction and also to witness that calamity. Well, I think Jeremiah has a lot to teach us in this moment because there's something incongruent about Jeremiah's character and the times in which he lived. Meaning to say, he was a hopeful, optimistic person who met a time in the world where incredible challenge was forced upon the Jewish people. And he faced it again and again and again. And he brought a sense of hope and optimism to every chapter of his prophecy that included a prophecy of destruction and heartache that he had to proclaim throughout the land. In this Haftorah, Jeremiah 31, it ends with the famous sentence, Haven Yakir li Ephraim, which appear over and over again through our Musaf service in Zichronot. You can see it on page 314 if you don't believe me. Truly, Ephraim is a dear son to me, a child that's delightful. Whenever I speak of him, I remember him more and more. That's why my heart yearns for him. I will receive him back in love, declares God. What is the Haftorah trying to tell us? It's trying to tell us that our relationship with God is everlasting and that God yearns for that relationship with us, even in our darkest times, even in our most challenging moments. And before I hand it off, I want to focus on that phrase for just a minute, Haven Yakirli, that we repeat in the liturgy. Haven Yakirli, my precious son. In the Talmud, Masechet Megillah, there is a conversation about what Torah readings we read on which days and which Haftorah readings we read on which days, and it's incredibly fascinating to rabbi nerds like myself. But the conversation goes a little bit like this, right? On Rosh Hashanah, they read the portion on the 7th month of the first of the month. That's actually the Maftir that we read today. And they read as the Haftorah is Ephraim, my dear son, which describes how God blessed her and she should, and some say they should read, and the Lord visited Sarah. Now, we're talking about before they made luachs, before they made pieces of paper that told us what to read. So we're reading a debate here in terms of what should be read and what should not be read, and you can see what we're reading in the Torah reading and Haftorah reading taking shape. And others read as the Haftorah from Chana, so they don't recognize it as the book of Samuel, from Chana. And nowadays, there are 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, is how this conversation goes along. So we're reading an evolution of this holiday, slowly but surely, because of course in the Torah it only recognizes 1 day of Rosh Hashanah. There are 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. On the first day, we read, and God remembered Abraham and Sarah. And on the second day, we read the Haftorah, Ephraim, my dear son. You might think that the Haftorah of Chana better connects with the Akedah this morning because Chana is forced to give her son up to the tabernacle for service. But instead, Chazal, the rabbis, the sages of our tradition, want us to leave Shul at the end of Rosh Hashanah with the message of how precious we are to God. And they put Chana, the Haftorah, as part of the first Torah reading, so that when Abraham and Sarah are remembered for their son, Chana is also remembered for her son. And that's how each of us has learned the Torah readings and the Haftorah readings, the connection. And we don't think to connect Akedah to Haven Yakirli. It doesn't make much sense. How does it make sense that we read about the Akedah and then we read this counter message that my son is precious to me? But the rabbis desperately want us to leave Shul, hearing Jeremiah's words, believing that it's actually within Jeremiah's message. In Jeremiah's message, there is the kernel of hope and strength. There is the assurance. There's the sacred nudge that we need to start our year off on the right foot. Haven Yakirli is the message that Chazal saw and called this entire Haftorah, because Haven Yakirli is, in fact, that powerful and that transformational.
I actually suggested to the rabbi that we auction off this sermon and see how much it's worth to you not to have a sermon. You can go home and have lunch. He didn't like that idea, so. You would not have wanted to invite Jeremiah to your Yontif table. You would not have wanted any of the biblical prophets at your table. They were not pleasant people. I don't know if you know people like this. These are obsessed people. These are committed people to such an extent that there's no room for social etiquette. There's no room for pleasantries. There's no room for small talk. All they want to tell you is how dire the situation is and what are you going to do about it? How are you going to fix it? What is your responsibility? Why are you not moving quicker now? These were people who were absolutely obsessed. And Jeremiah, more than any of them. Jeremiah was born somewhere in the middle of the 7th century, 600s BCE. In 640 BCE, the great king Josiah was killed, and that's when Jeremiah begins his prophecy in the city of Jerusalem. And he doesn't whisper, and he doesn't speak quietly. He screams again and again and again. I'm trying to figure out what is with this guy. And I think I understand what happens. He tells us that his prophecy began with a call from God at the age of 17. I think what happened to Jeremiah is that he started having nightmares. I think in his nightmares he saw the destruction of Jerusalem, the exile of its people, the murdering of the priests, the burning of the holy temple. In his dreams, he saw everything precious to him in the world was destroyed. And he woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, screaming. And then the next night, he went to sleep, and the dream recurred. And the next night, he went to sleep, and the dream recurred. It sounds like an episode from the Twilight Zone. But this is what motivates this man. Because he sees the destruction, he can feel it, he can hear it, he can smell the smoke and the stench of death all around him. And all he can do is to try to figure out, how can I fix this? The only other character that I know in Jewish history who matches his mania is Theodor Herzl. Herzl, born in 1880 in Budapest, educated in Vienna, goes to Paris as a correspondent for the New Free Press. His job is the best job in the world. He has to review opera and cafes in Paris. And in the middle of it, the Dreyfus trial takes place. And Herzl hears the crowd screaming at Alfred Dreyfus, accused of treason accused of betraying the French military, and the crowd is not screaming death to the traitor, or death to Dreyfus, or death to the enemy. The crowd is screaming death to the Jews. And Herzl, who believed in the promise of enlightenment, who believed that a new Europe was rising up, he hears those words, death to the Jews, in the middle of beautiful liberty, fraternity, justice, Paris, the beautiful liberal city of Paris, and he realizes that Jews will never be safe. I think Herzl went to sleep that night and he saw Auschwitz in his nightmares. Because Herzl then kills himself. He has a heart problem, but he kills himself trying to get Jews out of Europe. Jeremiah practically kills himself trying to warn this people. Trying to warn this people about what's coming. You know one of the phrases that he uses. It is so brutal, he says, the destruction that is coming is going to be so brutal, so terrifying, so complete, so exhaustive. Lo yishama bi'arei Yehuda u'bechutzot Yerushalayim kol sason v'kol simcha, kol chatan v'kol kala. This devastation is going to be so complete that never again will this city and these hills hear the sounds of brides and groom, the song of people gathered to celebrate. Happiness will be extinct from this land. That's how devastating this is coming. And he begged the people Israel. He begged them, and he begged them, and he begged them to do tshuva, to change. In his theology, all history is in the hands of God. And this was not the Babylonian Empire coming from the north. This was God coming to punish a sinful people that had abandoned its faith, that had betrayed its loyalties to the covenant of Israel, that had filled a city with poverty and violence and destruction and injustice, and God was going to get God's punishment on this people, and he begged them to change, and he begged them to change. And then it came. And then it came in the summer of 586 BC, the Babylonian Empire surrounded the city, broke through the walls, destroyed the holy temple, exiled the king and the court. And Jeremiah saw before his eyes what his nightmare had seen. There's a curious line. The Haftorah is the 31st chapter. Unfortunately, it ends 3 lines too soon. Because 3 lines after the Haftorah, it says as follows. Thus says the Lord of hosts, God of Israel. They shall again say this in the land of Judah and in the towns when I restore their fortunes. The Lord bless you, abode of righteousness, O holy mountain. Once again, he said, I promise you, now that you've gone into exile, now that you've seen all that you love destroyed, I promise you this is not the last word. This is what the rabbi said. This is not the last word of our history. Restoration will come. Judah and its town alike shall be inhabited by farmers and such as move with flocks. And I will give the thirsty abundant drink and satisfy all who languish. There will be a restoration, I promise you. And then this line comes, and he says, at this I awoke and looked around, and my sleep had been pleasant to me. For 40 years, the man went to sleep and saw the destruction of everything dear to him in his life in front of his eyes, and that motivated him with such a powerful impetus to go and preach this message of tshuva. Please save yourselves, save the city, save our people. And when it actually came, he got the first good night's sleep he'd had in 40 years. And he woke up in the morning, and his prophecy changed completely. From a prophecy of imminent doom and destruction to a prophecy of restoration and redemption. He said the same words of the prophecy, except he changed one word. Instead of saying, Lo yishama bi'arei Yehuda, never again shall these hills and towns hear the sounds of brides and groom, he said, Od yishama bi'arei Yehuda. I promise you that one day, these hills and these towns, shall hear the sounds of brides and grooms, celebrating new life and new love, and we will be resurrected here in our land. A couple of years ago, Nina and I were in Israel for the summer, and the nice people of Hamas decided to rain rockets down on top of us. And day after day, we had to run to the miklat, to the shelter. We were staying at Mishkanot Shananim, which is this beautiful place in Jerusalem, and right in front of it is Montefiore's windmill. You ever see this in pictures? Well, it turns out that Montefiore's windmill is the most popular place in Jerusalem for brides and grooms to take their prenuptial pictures. So every afternoon we came back to our place to take a little rest before the evening learning. There'd be this long line of brides and grooms, in their brides mostly, in their beautiful gowns, with their bridesmaids and their parents and their friends, and photographers ready to take pictures. Long lines. Jewish girls, Arab girls, all kinds of young women, and the grooms are off to the side smoking and worried, but that's how it happens in the world. And all of a sudden, the sirens went off. All of a sudden, the sirens went off. And we all had to run. Turns out there's a miklat, there's a bomb shelter underneath the windmill. Who knew? So we all run in. So here's Nina and me and 30 girls and taffeta smushed into this little space. And we're all smushed there waiting for the all clear. And as we stand there, brides and grooms, mothers and fathers, photographers and bridesmaids and friends. And then the all clear came out. And guess what happened? They all lined right back up and kept taking pictures. And I knew at that moment that Jeremiah's prophecy had come true. Od yishama b'yarei Yehuda u'bechutzot Yerushalayim kol sason v'kol simcha kol chatan v'kol kala. Once again, the city of Jerusalem and the hills of Judah ring with the sound of brides and grooms beginning life together with hope.
So at Claremont, I learned the prophets like this. There are 3 majors and 12 minors. It sounds like a musical course, okay? 3 majors and 12 minors. And the 3 majors are referred to as Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah. Those are the 3 major prophets that we know. Isaiah carries with him usually a universalist message, which is why if you show up to a soup kitchen or a food pantry, 9 times out of 10 you'll see a quote from Isaiah somewhere on the wall. Okay, even in Israel, you go to pantry packers or wherever we were in Jerusalem packing food, and there are quotes from Isaiah on the wall, how we need to take care of the sick and the needy and all of it. And Ezekiel is the prophet who believes that the Mashiach will come and everything will be reborn. So when you travel through Israel and you end up at different places and you see the prophecy of the dry bones. Of the dry bones, once again, the resurrection and new life. These are the words in the dream of Ezekiel. The 3rd temple is the dream of Ezekiel. Jeremiah is neither of those things. Jeremiah is the Jewish people prophet. Jeremiah is the Jewish people prophet, which is why, as the rabbi said, we use Jeremiah's words to bless couples under the chuppah, because we're sending them on a journey of the Jewish people. The chuppah is one of the most iconic moments in a Jewish person's life. And we send them on the way, on the journey, with a blessing of the words of Jeremiah. The blessing that we need of Jeremiah today is actually contained, maybe not in this Haftorah, but in the verse that immediately follows this Haftorah. You see, Chazal, the rabbis of the Talmud, they assumed that when they would assign us a Haftorah, we didn't just read that Haftorah, we understood the context of that Haftorah because we've read the book of Jeremiah ourselves. But now what happens is the only sections of the Nevi'im, of the prophets that we're familiar with, are the sections of the Haftorah. But the following chapter is another Haftorah It's my favorite section, perhaps, of all of prophets, and it's not just because it was my daughter's Haftorah for her bat mitzvah. It's from Parshat Behar. But it's the craziest story about Jeremiah. It's the story where the king, a Jewish king, of course, says to Jeremiah, all right, you've caused enough trouble. It's time for you to spend a little while in prison and think about what you've done. So he gets thrown in prison. And all of his papers and all of his prophecy, they're taken from him, and they're thrown into the stove. It says, it's enough. Nobody will ever hear the words of Jeremiah. And his scribe shows up, Baruch. He's the only one that we understand why it is that we have these words. And he starts transcribing all of Jeremiah's messages again. And then Jeremiah is freed with the words of his prophecy recorded for posterity. He's freed, and God gives him a message. And the message is one that we very much believe in today. God tells Jeremiah, you know that thing that I've been telling you about, how Jerusalem is about to be destroyed? And Jeremiah says, yes. And he says, good. Now I want you to go and buy a piece of property. So you could tell Jeremiah, he knew a little bit about real estate, because he said back to God, if Jerusalem is about to be destroyed, why would I buy property in Jerusalem today? God explains, because I want you to take that deed to Jerusalem, that deed to the land. I want you to put it into a jar, and I want you to bury it deep in the ground in Israel. Chapter 32 of Jeremiah, the chapter after the chapter that we read today. I want you to bury the deed to the land deep within the land, because a future generation of Jewish people is going to show up to this land. And they're going to start digging. And do you know what they're going to find? They're going to find that the land always belonged to them in the first place. They're going to think that they're the first generation of Jews that's returned to the land. They're going to think they're the first generation of Jews that's ever encountered struggle, that's ever faced challenge in the land or challenge in diaspora. They're going to think that they're the first ones to dig since Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But the deed that Jeremiah planted for us, just like the orange groves and the olive trees and everything else that we plant, just like every time we go to Israel and JNF tells us, I don't know if Elise Golden Berkeley is here right now, but JNF tells us, oh, there you are raising your hand. Here you go, you're going to love this, Elise, right? When JNF tells us, these are the trees that you planted all those years, right? This is the sign that says Valley Beth Shalom. And then we look at it and we marvel and we take pictures with the sign, and then we walk away and they take out the sign and they put in Sinai Temple right after us. Don't do that. That's right. Don't say that, Rabbi. That never happens. The truth is that those trees don't belong to Valley Beth Shalom. That act of planting wasn't thought of by us. That land doesn't belong to any of us that show up and say, we'd like to buy a home in Israel. The land belongs to the relationship, to the eternal relationship between God and the Jewish people. And Jeremiah assures us with the promise that it's actually at our lowest points that we are to invest in ourselves and invest in our people and invest in our relationship with God and Israel. Because he didn't know much about real estate, but he knew a lot about investment. The biggest dividends are paid off when we invest at our lowest point, when we feel the most challenged, when we feel the most forces in the world opposing us at that time. If in this moment, this Rosh Hashanah, you feel like there is tremendous challenge, burden, heartache on the Jewish people, then Jeremiah would say to you, it's time for you to invest. Invest in yourself, invest in Israel, invest in your sense of peoplehood, because that is when it's surely going to pay off the most. Every time I show up in Israel, I feel as though I discover a little bit more truth about the deed that he buried, the deed that Baruch recorded that story down in chapter 32. And when we read chapter 31 and he says, Haven Yakirli, so precious is my son, so precious is my son, that I will allow for this deed and this inheritance to wait for him, to earn it, to deserve it, to step forward into the foreground of history and say, it belonged to my ancestors, it will belong to my children one day. For this moment, it's my responsibility for it to belong to me. I will let Rabbi Feinstein close out and hopefully not auction off Rosh Hashanah for next year.
I can say more if you want.
He asked for $180. Shana Tova, everyone.